The helicopter flew low over the frozen land of Siberia. Below, there was nothing but white snow and gray sky for hundreds of miles. Dr. Daniel Harris looked out the window and felt the cold, even through the thick glass. He had been to many remote places in his 20 years as an archaeologist, but this was different. This place felt empty, like the world had forgotten it existed. Sitting next to him was Dr. Laura Bennett, a linguist who specialized in ancient languages. She was reading through a folder of documents, her eyes moving quickly over the pages. Across from them sat Kevin Wright, a geologist with a thick beard and tired eyes. Kevin had been the first to detect the anomaly 3 months ago, and he had not slept well since. The Russian government had contacted the American research team 2 weeks ago. They had found something beneath the permafrost, something that did not make sense. The initial scans showed a structure buried more than 2,000 feet below the ice. The structure was made of materials that no instrument could identify. More importantly, the dating results had come back impossible. Whatever was down there was older than human civilization. It was older than humanity itself. Daniel had spent his career studying ancient tombs and forgotten cities. He had walked through the pyramids of Egypt and explored hidden temples in South America. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what the Russians described. They spoke of walls that seemed to absorb light, of symbols that glowed without any power source, of a cold that went deeper than temperature. The helicopter landed at a small base camp surrounded by military vehicles and research equipment. Russian soldiers stood guard in every corner, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles. A tall man in a heavy coat walked toward the helicopter as the rotors slowed down. His name was Colonel Viktor Petrov, and he was in charge of security for the site. He shook hands with Daniel and led the team toward a large tent at the center of the camp. Inside, heat lamps fought against the freezing air. Maps and photographs covered every table. Scientists from different countries moved around, speaking in quiet voices. The atmosphere was tense, like everyone was waiting for something bad to happen. Colonel Petrov pointed to a large screen showing a 3D model of the underground structure. The tomb, as they called it, was massive. It was shaped like a dome, with a single entrance sealed by what appeared to be a door made of black metal. The door had no handles, no hinges, and no visible way to open it. Kevin explained what his instruments had detected. The structure was giving off a faint energy signature, something that should have been impossible for an object buried in ice for millions of years. The energy was weak but steady, like a heartbeat that had never stopped. Laura studied the symbols on the photographs. She recognized patterns similar to ancient Sumerian writing, but the style was different, older, more complex. She could not explain how writing systems from ancient Mesopotamia could exist in a tomb that predated humanity by millions of years. Daniel felt a growing sense of unease. Everything about this discovery was wrong. Tombs were built to honor the dead or to protect valuable objects. But this structure felt different. It felt like a prison. The next morning, the team descended into the excavation shaft. The elevator moved slowly through layers of ice that had formed over millions of years. The walls changed color as they went deeper, from white to blue to a deep, unsettling black. When the elevator stopped, Daniel stepped out into a cavern that took his breath away. The tomb stood before them, a perfect dome of black metal rising from the ice like a monument to something ancient and terrible. The surface was smooth, almost like glass, and it seemed to absorb the light from their flashlights rather than reflect it. Laura approached the wall and ran her gloved hand over the symbols carved into the metal. They were beautiful and frightening at the same time. Each symbol seemed to shift slightly when she looked away, as if they were alive. Kevin set up his equipment and began taking readings. The energy signature was stronger here, pulsing at regular intervals. He compared it to a heartbeat again, but this time his voice was shaking. The Russian team had already tried to open the door using conventional methods. Drills had broken against the metal. Explosives had done nothing. Even lasers had failed to leave a mark. But Kevin had a theory. The energy pulses were concentrated around specific symbols near the door. He believed that touching the symbols in the right order might unlock it. Daniel hesitated. The local guides had warned them about this place. They spoke of old stories passed down through generations, stories about demons that slept beneath the ice. The elders had begged them not to open the tomb. They said some things were buried for a reason, but science did not believe in demons. And the opportunity to discover something that could rewrite human history was too great to ignore. Laura identified a sequence of symbols that appeared repeatedly throughout the structure. She believed they formed a key, a code that would release the seal. After hours of analysis, she was ready to try. Daniel gave the order. Laura pressed the symbols one by one, her fingers trembling inside her gloves. With each touch, the symbols glowed brighter, and the energy pulses grew stronger. When she pressed the final symbol, the tomb shook. The black metal door split down the middle and slowly began to open. Cold air rushed out, colder than anything they had ever felt, cold that seemed to freeze their very souls. And then they heard it. A sound that traveled through the ice, through the earth, through the empty space between stars. It was a signal, a beacon that had been waiting millions of years to be released. Somewhere, far beyond the edge of the solar system, something received the message. The team stood in silence as the door finished opening. Beyond it was darkness, pure and absolute. Daniel turned on his flashlight and stepped forward. He had spent his life searching for the secrets of the past. Now he was about to discover a secret that would change the future of humanity forever. The tomb was open, and whatever was inside had been waiting a very long time. The darkness inside the tomb was not normal. It seemed to push back against their flashlights, allowing only small circles of light to pierce through. Daniel moved carefully, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. Behind him, Laura and Kevin followed, their breathing loud in the silence. The corridor was long and narrow. The walls were covered with more symbols, thousands of them, each one glowing faintly with a pale blue light. The air was thick and heavy, and every breath felt like swallowing ice. After walking for several minutes, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. Daniel stopped and stared at what lay before him. In the center of the room stood a platform, made of the same black metal as the rest of the structure. On the platform was a figure, standing upright, perfectly still, as if frozen in time. It was humanoid in shape, but clearly not human. The creature was nearly 8 feet tall, with long, thin limbs and gray skin that was almost transparent. Its face was narrow, with large closed eyes and a small mouth. It wore armor made of a dark material that seemed to blend with its body. Kevin checked his instruments. The readings were off the charts. The figure was the source of the energy pulses they had detected. It was alive, or at least it was not completely dead. Something inside it was still working, still waiting. Laura approached the walls of the chamber and began studying the symbols. These were different from the ones in the corridor. They were larger, more detailed, and they told a story. She worked for hours, translating piece by piece. The others set up lights and equipment, documenting everything they could. But as Laura's translation took shape, the excitement in the room began to fade. It was replaced by fear. The symbols told the history of the creature on the platform. It was called a harbinger, a scout from an ancient empire that had ruled the galaxy long before Earth had life. The empire had discovered Earth millions of years ago, when the planet was still young and full of potential. They saw the early forms of life and decided to wait. They would let the planet develop, let its creatures evolve, and then return to harvest its resources and enslave its inhabitants. But when the harbingers came back, they found something unexpected. They found humans, humans were different from other species the Empire had conquered. They were weak, small, and primitive. They had no technology, no weapons, and no understanding of the universe beyond their own world. But they had something else, something the Empire had never encountered before. They had fire in their hearts. The first harbingers landed on Earth, expecting easy conquest. Instead, they found a species that refused to surrender. Humans fought with sticks and stones. They used fire as a weapon. They set traps and ambushes. They attacked in the night and disappeared before dawn. They died by the thousands, but for every human that fell, more rose to take their place. The harbingers were shocked. They had conquered 100 worlds without resistance. But these primitive creatures, these humans, fought with a fury that defied logic. They did not care about odds or strategy. They only knew that they would not be slaves. The war lasted for centuries. The harbingers had superior technology, but humans had something more powerful. They had the will to survive at any cost. They adapted, learned, and grew stronger with each battle. They turned the weapons of their enemies against them. They attacked supply lines and destroyed communication centers. They made the harbingers pay for every inch of ground. In the end, the Empire decided that Earth was not worth the cost. The humans were too unpredictable, too dangerous. They ordered a retreat, but one harbinger refused to leave. It was the last of its kind on Earth, and it was determined to complete its mission. It continued fighting alone, killing thousands of humans over many years. But eventually, even it was defeated. The humans did not kill it. They could not. The harbinger's body was too strong, its technology too advanced. So they did something else. They built a prison around it. They carried it to the coldest, most remote place they could find. They buried it deep beneath the ice and sealed it, with every protection they could create. The symbols on the walls were not decorations. They were warnings. They told anyone who found this place to leave the seal intact. They explained that the creature inside was dangerous beyond measure. They begged future generations to never open the door. But there was something worse. Lavra found the final section of the translation and felt her blood turn cold. The harbinger was not just a soldier. It was a beacon. When the seal was broken, a signal would be sent across the galaxy. The Empire would know that Earth still existed. They would know that the harbinger had been found. And they would come to finish what they started. She turned to Daniel with tears in her eyes. They had made a terrible mistake. Daniel looked at the creature on the platform. Its eyes were still closed, but he felt like it was watching them. The energy pulses had grown stronger since they entered the chamber. The signal was already broadcasting. Kevin rushed to his equipment. He tried to find a way to stop the transmission, but it was too late. The signal had been traveling at speeds faster than light since the moment the door opened. By now, it had already reached the far edges of the solar system. Within days, it would reach the Empire's listening posts. The team gathered in the center of the chamber, their faces pale and frightened. They had come looking for discovery. They had found doom. Daniel made a decision. They had to warn the world. They had to tell everyone what was coming. Humanity had defeated these creatures once, in a time when they had nothing but primitive tools and raw courage. Maybe they could do it again. He ordered the team to pack their equipment and prepare to leave. They would take everything they had learned and bring it to the surface. The governments of the world needed to know. But as they turned to leave, the energy pulses stopped. The chamber fell silent, and behind them, the harbinger opened its eyes. The eyes of the harbinger were black, completely black, without any white or color. They reflected nothing but absorbed everything. When they opened, Daniel felt a cold deeper than anything the Siberian ice could produce. It was a cold that reached into his chest and wrapped around his heart. The creature did not move at first. It simply looked at them, studying each human with an expression that seemed almost curious. Then it stepped down from the platform. Its movements were smooth and silent. Despite its size, it made no sound as it walked across the metal floor. The armor on its body shifted and changed, adapting to each motion like a second skin. Kevin grabbed Laura and pulled her behind a stack of equipment. Daniel stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away from those empty black eyes. When the Harbinger spoke, its lips did not move. The words appeared directly in their minds, a telepathic voice that was cold and ancient and filled with contempt. Said that it had been waiting. It had felt them enter the tomb. It had heard their little machines buzzing and clicking. It had listened to them discuss its history like students reading from a book. And it had watched them open the seal that had kept it trapped for so long. The creature thanked them. Its gratitude was mockery. Colonel Petrov and his soldiers rushed into the chamber, weapons raised. The Harbinger turned to look at them with what might have been amusement. The soldiers opened fire. The sound of gunshots echoed through the metal walls. The bullets hit the creature. Daniel saw the impacts clearly, but the Harbinger did not fall. It did not even flinch. The bullets stopped inches from its body, held in place by some invisible force, then fell to the ground like harmless rain. The Harbinger raised one hand. A wave of energy burst outward. The soldiers were thrown across the chamber like toys. Some hit the walls and did not get up. Others screamed as the cold touched them, frost spreading across their bodies in seconds. Petrov managed to roll behind a pillar. He shouted orders into his radio, calling for backup, calling for extraction, calling for anyone who could help. But the Harbinger moved toward him with calm, measured steps. Daniel finally broke free from his paralysis. He grabbed a piece of equipment from the floor, some kind of heavy scanner, and threw it at the creature. It bounced off harmlessly, but it got the Harbinger's attention. The creature turned to face him. For a moment, they stared at each other, human and alien, predator and prey. The Harbinger spoke again in his mind. It said that it remembered humans. It remembered their fire and their screaming. It remembered killing them by the thousands. It said that nothing had changed. Humans were still weak. They were still vermin. And when the Empire arrived, they would be erased from existence. Lavra crawled out from behind the equipment. She held a small device in her hand, something she had taken from one of the tables. Her voice was shaking, but her words were steady. She told the creature that it was wrong. Humans had changed. They had grown stronger. They had built cities and machines and weapons. They had split the atom and walked on the moon. They were not the primitive creatures the Harbingers had fought before. The creature laughed. The sound in their minds was horrible, like ice breaking in a frozen lake. It said that technology meant nothing. Weapons meant nothing. The Empire had conquered species with technology far beyond anything Earth possessed. What mattered was power, and humans had none. Kevin appeared from behind a fallen pillar. He was carrying a small pack, and Daniel recognized it immediately. It was an emergency demolition charge, something the team had brought in case they needed to seal the tomb from the inside. Kevin looked at Daniel. There was no fear in his eyes, only determination. He said that they had to stop the signal. They had to bury this thing again, even if it meant burying themselves with it. Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to find another way, but he looked at the bodies of the soldiers, at the frost creeping across the walls, and the ancient horror standing before them. He nodded. Kevin ran toward the corridor leading to the entrance. The Harbinger turned to follow him, but Lavra activated the device in her hand. It was some kind of scanner or beacon. It let out a high-pitched sound that made the creature stop and grab its head in pain. The distraction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Kevin reached the corridor and kept running. The Harbinger recovered and looked toward the escape route. It raised its hand to send another blast of energy. Daniel tackled Laura to the ground just as the wave passed over them. The cold bit into his back, and he screamed. But they were alive. The Harbinger moved toward the corridor, but it was too late. A massive explosion shook the tomb. The walls cracked. The ceiling began to fall. Tons of ice and rock came crashing down, filling the corridor with debris. Kevin was gone. He had sacrificed himself to bury the creature again, but the Harbinger was not finished. It turned back to the remaining humans with rage burning in those black eyes. It said that the signal had already been sent. The Empire would come. Kevin's sacrifice had bought them time, nothing more. Daniel grabbed Laura and pulled her toward a small opening in the wall, a ventilation shaft barely visible in the chaos. They squeezed through as the chamber continued to collapse behind them. The shaft led upward through the ice. They climbed in darkness, their fingers numb, their lungs burning. Behind them, they heard the Harbinger's voice in their minds, promising that this was not over. They emerged on the surface just as the base camp exploded into chaos. The ground was shaking. Cracks spread across the ice in every direction. Soldiers ran in panic. Daniel looked back at the collapsed excavation site. Somewhere down there, the Harbinger was trapped again. But he knew it would not stay trapped forever. He grabbed Laura's hand and ran toward the helicopter. They had to warn the world. They had to tell everyone what was coming. Humanity had defeated these creatures once, long ago. Now they would have to do it again. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The age of ignorance was over. The universe knew where to find them now, and the clock was ticking. 3 months had passed since the tomb was opened. The world had changed in ways that Daniel never thought possible. At first, no one believed them. When Daniel and Laura arrived in Washington with their data and their warnings, the officials looked at them like they were insane. Aliens buried in Siberia. An ancient war between humans and creatures from the stars. A signal calling an invasion fleet to Earth. It sounded like a bad science fiction movie, but then the evidence started to pile up. Military satellites detected the signal traveling through space. Scientists analyzed the fragments of metal recovered from the tomb and confirmed that the materials were not from Earth. Telescopes spotted movement at the edge of the solar system. Objects that were not asteroids. Objects that were changing course toward the inner planets. Within weeks, the secret was shared among the leaders of every major nation. Within a month, a new organization was formed. They called it the Global Defense Initiative, and its mission was simple: prepare humanity for war. Daniel and Laura became key advisors. They knew more about the enemy than anyone else alive. They had seen the Harbinger. They had read its history. They understood what was coming. The nations of Earth put aside their differences. Old enemies became allies. Factories that once built cars and phones started building weapons and armor. Laboratories that once researched medicine started developing shields and energy systems based on the alien technology. Commander Nathan Green led the military coordination. He was a Navy pilot who had served in conflicts around the world, a man with calm eyes and steady hands. When he heard about the alien threat, he did not panic. He started planning. Nathan established training camps on every continent. Soldiers learned new tactics, new formations, new ways of fighting an enemy that had conquered worlds. Pilots trained in experimental aircraft that moved faster than anything ever built before. Scientists worked day and night to understand the technology recovered from the tomb. But the enemy was not waiting. The Harbinger escaped its prison 6 weeks after the explosion. It dug through the ice and rock with its bare hands, driven by a rage that had burned for millions of years. When it reached the surface, it found the base camp destroyed and the humans gone. It did not care. It had a new mission now. Before the fleet arrived, It would show these creatures why the Empire had conquered a galaxy. It would remind them of fear. The attacks began in remote areas. A research station in Antarctica destroyed in a single night. A military base in northern Canada reduced to frozen rubble. Ships in the Arctic Ocean sinking without any distress signals. At first, the governments tried to keep the attacks secret. They did not want to cause panic. But secrets cannot last forever. When the Harbinger destroyed a small town in Alaska, killing everyone and leaving no survivors, the truth came out. People were afraid. Some ran, some hid, some prayed to gods they had forgotten. But many did something else. They volunteered. They stepped forward and said that if a fight was coming, they wanted to be part of it. Nathan welcomed them all. Farmers and teachers and engineers and students. Anyone who could hold a weapon, anyone who could drive a vehicle, anyone who could help in any way. The defense of Earth was not just for soldiers. It was for everyone. Daniel worked with the science teams to develop countermeasures. The Harbinger had weaknesses. Laura's device had hurt it with sound. High-frequency waves could disrupt its telepathic abilities. Intense heat could damage its armor. These weaknesses were small, but they were something. Engineers built new weapons. Rifles that fired superheated plasma. Grenades that released bursts of disruptive energy. Missiles equipped with warheads designed to pierce alien hulls. Every weapon was tested, refined, and distributed as fast as possible. The Harbinger continued its attacks, but the humans were fighting back now. A squadron in Canada managed to wound it with experimental missiles. A team in Norway drove it off with concentrated sound weapons. Each battle cost lives, but each battle proved that the creature could be hurt. Then came the day that changed everything. The Harbinger attacked a coastal city in California. It expected easy prey, terrified civilians running in panic. Instead, it found a trap. Nathan had predicted the attack pattern. He had studied the creature's movements and identified its next likely target. He positioned his best units in the city and waited. When the Harbinger arrived, it faced a wall of fire. Tanks fired plasma rounds. Aircraft dropped bombs. Infantry units hit it with everything they had. The creature fought back with devastating power, killing dozens of soldiers and destroying entire blocks. But it could not win. Not this time. Nathan led the final assault himself. He flew an experimental fighter equipped with the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. He circled around the Harbinger, dodging its attacks, drawing its attention away from the ground forces. Then he fired. 3 missiles struck the creature directly. The warheads exploded with a combination of heat and sound that tore through its armor. The Harbinger screamed, a telepathic cry that was heard by every human for miles. For the first time in millions of years, the Harbinger was bleeding. It retreated into the ocean, disappearing beneath the waves. The battle was over, and humanity had won its first real victory. But the war was just beginning. Daniel stood on the shore and looked at the sky. Somewhere out there, the fleet was getting closer. The telescopes had confirmed the numbers. 100 ships, maybe more, each one larger than anything Earth had ever built. They had weeks, maybe months, before the invasion arrived. The Harbinger was wounded but alive. And even if they killed it, the fleet would still come. But humanity was ready. They had faced the first Harbinger with nothing but courage. Now they had weapons and knowledge, and a planet united in defiance. Nathan stood beside Daniel. He said that this was just the first battle. The real fight was coming. But for the first time, he believed they could win. Daniel nodded. Humanity had been chosen as prey once before. They had proven themselves to be something else. Now they would prove it again, to an entire galaxy if necessary. The stars were watching, and humanity was rising. The fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. Daniel stood in the command center of the Global Defense Initiative headquarters, deep beneath a mountain in Colorado. Screens covered every wall, showing feeds from satellites and stations around the world. The room was silent as the images came in. 112 ships emerged from the darkness beyond Mars. They were massive, each one shaped like a curved blade, black against the stars. They moved in perfect formation, a wall of death approaching the small blue planet that had dared to resist. Lara stood beside Daniel, translating the transmissions the fleet was broadcasting. The messages were simple: surrender, submit, accept the mercy of the Empire. Those who resisted would be erased. Commander Nathan Green gave his response. Every antenna on Earth broadcasted at the same time, in every human language and in the telepathic frequency the aliens used. He said that humanity would not surrender. He said that this planet was not a prize to be claimed. He said that every man, woman, and child on Earth would fight until their last breath. The fleet did not respond. It simply continued forward. The first battle took place near the moon. Orbital platforms opened fire with weapons derived from Harbinger technology. Missiles streaked through space, leaving trails of light behind them. The alien ships returned fire with beams of pure energy that vaporized anything they touched. 3 platforms were destroyed in the first minute, but they took 5 alien ships with them. Fighter squadrons launched from hidden bases across the globe. Daniel watched the screens as thousands of pilots flew into the void, each one knowing they might not come back. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and artists, ordinary people who had trained for 3 months to face an enemy that had conquered worlds. The fighters swarmed around the alien ships like insects around giants. Plasma rifles and energy missiles hammered at the enemy hulls. Some bounced off harmlessly, but others found weak points and tore through metal. Nathan led the main assault. His squadron targeted the center of the formation, where the largest ship held position. Intelligence suggested this was the flagship, the command vessel of the entire fleet. If they could destroy it, they might break the enemy's coordination. The Harbinger was aboard that ship. Daniel could feel its presence even from across the void. It had recovered from its wounds and returned to lead the invasion. It wanted revenge. The battle lasted for hours. Ships exploded in silent flashes of light. Bodies drifted through the emptiness. The alien fleet pushed forward, breaking through the first line of defense. Then the second. Ground forces prepared for landing. Soldiers took positions in cities and mountains and forests. Civilians who could not fight moved to shelters and bunkers. Children were sent to the deepest, safest places humanity could find. The first alien landing craft touched down in Eastern Europe. The soldiers that poured out were not harbingers, but another species, tall and thin with multiple arms and weapons grafted directly into their bodies. They were shock troops, bred for nothing but war. Humans met them with everything they had: tanks and artillery and portable plasma weapons. The ground shook with explosions. Buildings collapsed. Blood stained the snow. The aliens expected easy victory. They found something else. For every human that fell, 2 more took their place. Soldiers who ran out of ammunition picked up rocks and metal bars. Civilians joined the fight with hunting rifles and kitchen knives. Wounded men and women refused to retreat. They stood their ground and made the enemy pay for every step. The aliens had never seen anything like it. They had conquered 100 worlds without this kind of resistance. They did not understand why these creatures refused to accept the inevitable dot in space. Nathan reached the flagship. His squadron had been reduced to a handful of fighters, but they pressed on. Energy beams cut through his wingmen one by one. Explosions lit up the void. Nathan dodged and weaved through the fire. He could see the command bridge of the flagship, a massive dome of dark metal at the front of the ship. He aimed his missiles and prayed. The Harbinger's voice entered his mind. It told him that resistance was pointless. It told him that humanity would fall, just as every other species had fallen. It told him to accept his death with dignity. Nathan smiled. He opened a channel to every human within range. He said that he was just a pilot from a small town in Texas. He said that he was not special or important. He was just one human among billions, but he was human. And that meant he would never stop fighting. He fired everything he had. Missiles streaked toward the flagship, followed by the last of his squadron. Then he pushed his throttle forward and flew directly at the command bridge. The Harbinger screamed. Not in fear, but in disbelief. It had seen humans die before, but it had never seen them die like this, choosing death over surrender, turning their own destruction into a weapon. Nathan's fighter struck the bridge at full speed. The explosion tore through the flagship, ripping it apart from the inside. The Harbinger died in the blast, its ancient body finally destroyed after millions of years. Without their command ship, the alien fleet fell into chaos. Ships collided with each other. Communication broke down. The coordinated attack became a scattered mess. Human forces pressed the advantage. Surviving fighters hit the damaged ships with everything they had left. Submarines surfaced to launch nuclear missiles modified with alien technology. Orbital platforms that had been playing dead came back online and opened fire. Within hours, the fleet was broken. 30 ships remained from the original 112. They turned and fled, jumping to hyperspace and disappearing into the darkness between stars. On the ground, the fighting continued for days. But the tide had turned. Without support from space, the alien soldiers were overwhelmed. Humans hunted them down in cities and forests and mountains, refusing to stop until every invader was dead or captured. The war was over. Daniel stood before the United Nations 1 month later. The building was damaged, its walls scarred by battle, but it still stood. Representatives from every nation sat in the assembly hall, waiting to hear what he had to say. He spoke about Kevin, who had given his life to buy them time. He spoke about Nathan, who had given his life to end the war. He spoke about the millions who had fought and died to defend their home. But he also spoke about the future. The universe now knew that humanity existed. Other empires, other threats, other challenges awaited among the stars. Earth could not hide anymore. It had to grow, to expand, to become something greater than it had ever been. He said that the war had shown what humans were capable of. Not their weapons or technology, but their spirit. Their refusal to surrender. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for each other. The age of fear was over. The age of expansion was beginning. Laura stood beside him as he finished his speech. She was thinking about the symbols in the tomb, the warnings left by ancient humans. They had defeated the Harbingers once with nothing but fire and courage. Now their descendants had done it again. Daniel took her hand. Together, they looked up at the sky. The stars were still there, distant and unknown, but they were no longer a threat. They were an invitation. Humanity had proven itself. Now it was time to claim its place among the stars. And wherever the universe might lead, humanity would face the darkness not with fear, but with fire. The tomb in Siberia had been a prison, but its opening had set humanity free. This was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning.